Global threats to food security and rising import costs are hitting the Caribbean hard. The region's heavy reliance on imports makes us susceptible to global market shocks, food security. To tackle these challenges, the Caribbean Development Bank is proud to facilitate an in-depth discussion to explore key solutions on trade and logistics. We have brought together policymakers, trade experts, and private sector leaders to examine enablers like infrastructure development, regulatory enhancements, digitalizing trade systems, and promoting regional value chains. It's time for an action-focused discussion on accelerating development, optimizing trade connectivity, and logistics for growth. Trade is vital for the Caribbean's advancement. Let's talk about actions and solutions to move this crucial sector forward. And that conversation starts now.
Greetings and welcome to those here with us and those online. To this seminar entitled Accelerating Development, Optimizing Trade Connectivity and Logistics for Growth. I am Ian Durant. I'm the Director of the Economics Department at the Caribbean Development Bank. And this seminar revolves around two studies that the bank commissioned on logistics performance in Grenada and St. Lucia last year. What I propose to do is to share briefly the findings of those studies, after which I will engage this elite panel assembled here today in a discussion around the issues that the studies unearthed. So, with respect to the presentation, I'm going to talk about the background and objectives of the study. And then I'm going to look at the current situation in these two locations, St. Lucia and Grenada. And then we're going to look at some proposals and recommendations, and finally some conclusions. So, to the background of the study, the why, if you will. Now, why did we undertake this study? The bank's current strategy speaks to advancing resilience of the region across 5 dimensions of resilience, specifically social, environmental, production, financial, and institutional resilience. Now, with respect to production resilience, the objective is to build production systems that can withstand or recover quickly from shocks. What does production resilience really mean? Well, in a small open economy, it means diversified export earnings. Small economies rely on stable export revenue to operate in a sustainable manner and avoid stops and starts. And diversification helps to keep those earnings stable. Now, as we said in our strategic plan update, export diversification generates resilience by reducing the susceptibility of national output to the fortunes of 1 or 2 industries. And research has shown that there's a pronounced negative relationship between growth and export concentration. And we have highlighted that relationship by drawing on the 2020 experience in our client countries, which are largely tourism dependent. Now, export diversification needs a facilitative ecosystem that helps to generate high growth, internationally competitive firms that can export successfully. As you can see, this ecosystem has many dimensions and subdimensions, all of which are crucial to creating internationally competitive firms. This ecosystem includes transportation and logistics institutions, infrastructure, and, of course, human capital. Trade logistics is the process of moving physical goods from supplier to customer across at least one international border. The cost and efficiency of this process helps to determine the price, quality, and reliability at which a domestic producer can supply international markets. And in essence, the chain is as strong as its weakest link. So, bearing this in mind, CDB commissioned the International Trade Center to carry out a logistics efficiency study in St. Lucia and Grenada. The specific outcome of the project is to provide recommendations that would improve trade and logistics performance and competitiveness in Grenada and St. Lucia. We've published those two studies, and you can access them at our website, the address of which is located there at the bottom right. Now, the objectives of the study were, in essence, to review the policy and regulatory framework in the transport and logistics sector, to identify ongoing initiatives to improve logistics performance and their impact on trade and economic development in the region, to quantify and qualify transport costs in the three transport modes for imports and exports, and establish the duration and cost involved for importing and exporting through the main port. So, what did these studies reveal about the logistics performance in St. Lucia and Grenada? Now, the issues affecting logistics performance in St. Lucia and Grenada are almost identical. There's limited berthing and draft capacity and equipment. Containers can only be loaded at certain times because of limited working hours. Shipping rates are high because of low connectivity. And there are tariff structures that predated containerized cargo. In addition to that, both Grenada and St. Lucia customs require documents to be submitted even with Asicuda World. And there's also the absence of cold storage facilities at some ports, and the inspection times are long. There was a SWOT analysis undertaken by the consultants, and this revealed a few additional challenges in the logistics sector, including inadequate road networks and poor road conditions, aging port infrastructure, and inefficient labor practices at the ports. So, with respect to the proposals and the recommendations, there were quite a few, and one of the core things, as far as recommendations are concerned, is the need to build consensus and strengthen consensus around what needs to be done to improve logistics between the public sector and the private sector. So, in essence, dialogue is important. There were quite a few, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there were quite a few other recommendations, including the establishment of a national logistics skill curricula, a review of the processes for cargo collection and clearance at the port, a review of, with respect to implementing a 24/7 work system at the port, implementation of a number of digital improvements, including a port community system and a terminal operating system. In addition to that, training for the logistics center was mentioned as a need. The need to explore the development of a new port in the case of St. Lucia, and of course that is something that is being explored, and CDB is actually assisting the government in looking at the viability of that. Construction of a proper dedicated cargo handling facility, construction of cold storage facilities, develop and grow the e-commerce sector, and the list goes on. So there are about 23 or 24 recommendations in both studies, and as I indicated, these recommendations are intended to provide policymakers with actionable recommendations that they can implement in order to improve their logistics performance. So, in conclusion, realizing the potential of the region to expand exports, diversify and establish regional supply chains and greater connectivity requires improved logistics. And I think that you've heard enough from me, and it's time now to engage this, as I refer to them, this elite panel. And I'm going to introduce them briefly. You have seen their bios online, so I'm not going to go into their extensive list of achievements, but I'm just going to, starting from my immediate left, I'm just going to introduce you to Darwin Telemaque. Mr. Telemaque currently serves as the CEO of the Antigua and Barbuda Port Authority, a position he has held for 10 years. Next to him is Cora Ann Robertson Sylvester. Mrs. Robertson Sylvester is the Chief Executive Officer of Seaboard Freight and Shipping Jamaica Limited, a subsidiary of Seaboard Marine Limited. Next to her is Fatima Arroyo. Fatima is the World Bank Infrastructure Program leader for Caribbean countries at the World Bank. And on her left is Wilson Pierce. Mr. Pierce is the Senior Director for Global Business Development for the Canadian Commercial Corporation. So, the first thing that I'm going to ask the panelists, ask of each panelist, is basically to give us, you've seen the reports, and I'm going to ask you to provide some reflections, if you like, on the findings and the recommendations. So I'm going to start with Darwin. Darwin, Antigua and St. Lucia are not too far apart geographically, but how similar are the issues raised in these studies to those in Antigua and Barbuda and the rest of the region?
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the CDB for inviting me to this panel, both in my capacity as the CEO of the Antigua Port Authority, as well as the chairman of the Port Management Association of the Caribbean, as well as the chairman of the OECS Port Committee. And so in answering your question, the context of shipping, logistics, infrastructure, and all of the various components that you mentioned in the report are things that I would have a very acute awareness and knowledge of. And so just to summarize my response to your question, about a year ago, we did a PowerPoint presentation. It's called The Caribbean Ports at a Crossroad. And there were 5 elements that we highlighted in that PowerPoint presentation, which the report picked up very clearly in the study. And the study was just done. I had no involvement in the study. I read it and I thought, how ironic that we saw infrastructure, digitalization, we saw the issue of labor, we saw the issue of tariffs, we saw the issue of corporate governance. All of these 5 things are in a PowerPoint that speaks of the challenges that they create for Caribbean ports. And it was very, I think, should I say fortuitous or quite interesting that the study done by some individuals who had no interaction with us picked up the very same things. However, I would like to say that in Antigua, there is a little bit of difference in that we just built a brand new port. We're the first country to have built out 100% of our port, our single domestic port, in a post-colonial era. So that's the first for the Caribbean. And what we did with that port is we transformed some of the items that are highlighted, Many of the others still exist. So the infrastructure piece in Antigua, we would have moved ahead. But one of the things that I'm clear of is that if you are part of a chain, your own individual improvement does very little to your overall existence and impact. And that has been something that I will highlight that later on as we speak. So there is no grand benefit that we can achieve doing something singularly as we did, because the same risks, same challenges exist, and so we need to have a broader regional strategy that would allow us to actually receive benefits in terms of logistics, transport, cost of goods, improving trade, and all of the things that we'd like to see happening. So I thought the report actually went deeper into some areas that I liked. I like the information it brought out on the intricacies of how the trade is actually broken down, regional, international, the various commodities, and it got into some areas of digitalization, and I thought it's a very excellent report, by the way. However, I would like to just surmise that I thought there's a little bit of too much of a burden, Ian, that was placed on ports that relates to trade. Because ports don't trade. Ports handle cargo. And we have to separate the policy that actually creates the reason for trade from actual ports and try to design trade so that it requires that ports themselves are equipped to handle what trade generates. So what we have as regional islands, all of us, St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent, is that we are forced to handle trade from almost a unitary location. So South Florida feeds us. And so we handle trade from Miami, and there's very little inter-regional trade. I think the effort by our governments in recent times to try to spur on our regional trade has to do with a lot more than ports. And I think ports gets a shot in the stick when we start saying if we had better ports, we'd have more trade. That's not necessarily true. There are reasons why trade happens. I can speak to that later on, if you like. But I think we did get a sense in that report that across the board, the factors that exist in every island, including Barbados, Trinidad, with the exception of Jamaica that Corianna will speak to. Now, there's one part of the report that I'd like to stress. I don't think that the reason that we have high costs at our ports is just because there is less ships. As a matter of fact, I think the report actually points out that we are at risk because there are less ships, but also the inability of our ports to be more efficient and productive may very well be driving the ships away. And so the necessity for us to improve our ports is not only an issue relating to trade, it's an issue that relates to our very existence, because we survive on the activities that takes place at our ports, almost 98 or 100%, I should say. And so I would want to say that when we look at why we should improve the efficiencies of labor, digitalization, infrastructure, it is because our ports are quintessential to our existence and necessary for us to do it. And I'd close by saying, we speak of shipping cost because we see the number on the bill of lading. It's $6,000 for a container. What we don't see are the hidden costs that exist within our own space, the space that we control, the port, the stevedoring cost, the handling, all of the nuances that goes on between the tackle to the warehouse, the cost of transport, the cost of brokerage, the cost of storage at the port, the double charging of storage at the port by the port and the shipping lines, where a customer could end up paying the Port Authority $6,000 to get the box out of the port and paying the shipping line $12,000. So he just spent, it's not on the bill of lading, but that customer just spent $18,000 that no one actually is speaking of. The reason I'm highlighting that is that's happening in our space. So we have some fixing to do. And we can speak to that a little later.
Yeah, so the bottom line is that it's expensive to move goods from one country to the next, and that has implications for our producers. Ultimately, our producers have to be able to get into a country at a price that compares with other producers. Cora, you are a bit further north. Is your experience, are your experiences different?
My experiences are a little different. And good afternoon, everyone. Everyone in the room and everyone in cyberspace, everywhere. In Jamaica, our situation is different because our ports are privately owned or some are given on concessions. So in Jamaica, we have two ports, our transshipment port, Kingston Freeport Terminal, which is on concession to CMA for 30 years, and that happened in 2015. And that was done by the government of Jamaica because they realized that they did not have the money to put in the infrastructure that was necessary to bring the port to a first world standard. And what we have seen in the years that this port has been divested is that over $50 million have been spent on equipment to upgrade. We got a new terminal handling system, and what that is for the people that are not in logistics, it's called a TOS. So you're able to identify where each individual box is, which helps with your efficiency when you're trying to load a vessel or deliver it for domestic use. So that happened. And then there's Kingston Wharves, which is on the Jamaican Stock Exchange, and that's owned by multiple companies in Jamaica. And that has just invested or is about to invest $100 million to redevelop berths, to make sure that the berths are in a position to handle the new bigger ships that have to come into our space. And what is important about Jamaica is that we have moved away from smaller vessels, which bring us economies of scale. So when we get the bigger vessels, we get economies of scale. Something that we talk about all the time, but it's very important, is that Jamaica is directly in front of the Panama Canal. And as a result, we have all of the transshipment, and Jamaica is a hub for interregional cargo. The cargo comes from Europe, comes from the Far East, and then feeder vessels take the cargo down to the Caribbean. So we help with interregional trade because of our exposure, because of where we're located, and the fact that we've spent the money to upgrade our ports. So our situation in Jamaica is different. So it is my opinion that, Jamaica plays a pivotal role, and we have a lot of problems. We still have issues, but I also think that we need to look at how we're going to move the cargo interregionally between our islands at a competitive cost. And as Darwin said, that, you have to have the business there, and then the shipping lines will follow.
Thanks.
So, thank you.
Alrighty, interesting perspectives. You talked a little bit about the infusion of technology, Internet of Things, with respect to tracking and so on. And we're going to come back to some of these issues, but I want to move on. I want to get Fatima into this conversation. And Fatima, you are coming from outside of the region. You've had experiences as far as Europe, Africa, and you've seen the findings of this study, or rather these studies. What do you think are some of the priorities that should be set as far as improving logistics in the region?
Thanks, Ian, and hello, everyone, virtually and here in the room. So, as Ian mentioned, I'm very new in the region. I have been working for 1 month. I'm based in Kingston, in Jamaica, and before I've been working for almost a decade in the Africa region. So I have read with a lot of interest these very good quality reports on trade and connectivity in the Caribbean. And there are 3 points that I found very interesting as I read them. The first point it is that when we talk about trade and connectivity, we are really talking about something that is multi-sectorial. It's not only about infrastructure. Darwin was mentioning it is not only about ports. It is really multi-sectorial. I mean, it comes, for example, to the point of thinking if we want to improve the trade of agriculture products in the region, we need a certain consolidation on the agriculture sector to really be able to trade to other countries. So it's my first point that came to my mind when I was reading this report. It was this point. We really need to think this from a multi-sectorial perspective. The second point it is that I think there is an extremely important role both from the public sector and the private sector in this agenda. The public sector has to play a role, and I would say even more active role that is playing today in the harmonization of the different dimensions that make trade possible. It has to invest in a strategic infrastructure. It needs to put in place the policies. But there is also a very, very important role from private sector. We have heard from Cora the case of Jamaica, for example. The case of the port of Jamaica is, I think, the example that is mentioned in very often as a fantastic example of public-private sector collaboration in the port sector. So really, for me, a second point in the report, it was this complementary role of public and private, and how it's a relationship that needs to be built up. And the third point, it was actually, I think, based on the reports, for me, there was a clear, conclusion about the need of this regionality in trade. So instead of thinking about individual countries trading, there is a need to think the Caribbean as a region, and in this rationale, then it's important to think about building hubs, building, economic of scales, etc. But at the same time, what we see in the reality is politically that discussion, it is much more complex than that. So I think that for me, something that I found extremely interesting, and probably this is something to continue deepening, is how how to move forward at this regionality on trade in the context of the political economy that we have today in the region. No? So that was the third point for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Fatima. So Wilson, you're at home. You're coming from Canada. Canada has a pretty good logistics performance index score. I'm sure that you have some lessons that you could share with us.
Well, thanks, Ian. I'll try not to take credit for all of the logistics improvements in Canada, but it's interesting as I read the reports and looked at the panel. I mean, the one thing I should emphasize is that the Canadian Commercial Corporation, we work with Canadian companies who are engaged to deliver or implement aspects of infrastructure for governments around the world. So I'm gonna take that lens to this particular piece, because I think we've got experts in the other areas, and I'll try to contain myself to those sorts of observations. So, from that perspective, one of the things we look at, there's about 3 or 4 things that I saw in the reports that were of interest. First of all, what I've seen in the work in the Caribbean in prior projects is a number of, and I'm being intentionally dramatic here, but overpriced projects because of the failure to get economies of scale. And is that a pan-Caribbean digital initiative or something like that? But there's a lot of these projects that you can't hit the economy of scale and or that never get off the ground because the local budget never matches the requirement for the supplier to sort of distribute those costs if they were to come in as a third party. So as we work with companies, we see that all the time. And I've had 20 plus years of experience seeing that challenge. So getting those economies of scale and then understanding where. I mean, what really jumped out in these reports was it triggered a lot of thoughts around the role for the public sector and the role for the private sector. Like, where can the two cooperate? What can the public sector do to establish a consistent, reliable environment, both at a regulatory level and to a degree, if I can say that, at a physical level, with respect to certain of the operations or the environment for the operations. So that's a very interesting thing because certainly a lot of our companies, when we talk to them, that's when they start to pull away. They're unsure about the regulatory environment. It's inconsistent. You've got a series of relatively small markets for which you have to make a series of major adjustments often in terms of how you interact, right? And I think some of the panelists have talked about this. So that's one thing that jumped out, and I think the 23 priorities, there's 4 or 5 of them that really leap out in terms of where CDB and the public investment could go to establish a degree of commonality that would then start to crowd in some of that financing. The other thing that I've had the benefit of, because I was thinking about this after we talked earlier, the Canadian logistics environment is great. We actually have our own interprovincial trade barriers. So we are one federal jurisdiction, but there's constant irritants that we face there. But I've had the opportunity to do some work in Asia as well. And the ASEAN region has a digital trade initiative that they've started, which is a really interesting initiative given the nature of trade and the markets that are involved and their efforts to get some elements of a common platform amongst, again, it's not 15 to 20, but it's a roughly similar number of countries. That's interesting. You look at jurisdictions like Indonesia, which are effectively a large archipelago, and so as a proxy for the Caribbean, the state plays a really interesting role in providing some of the basic infrastructure around logistics and around agriculture, which then allows the private sector to crowd in because they've got a common infrastructure. So, and I don't know enough about the CARICOM Wharf operations and facilities that are mentioned, but there's lots of elements there to start here. But perhaps I'm more naive and enthusiastic than informed there. I'm not sure, Darren. But
mm-hmm. Yes, it seems as though you've opened a hornet's nest because because both Cora and Darwin want to follow up. Darwin.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the insertion of Indonesia is always a very sad reality for me. Indonesia is one country, which is it's not a good example for us because the Indonesian government has one responsibility to its people. And we are not one people. We are people who are existing in real individual sovereign spaces. And each sovereign space has its own interest. If I step aside from the port discussion for a while, I think that is the barrier for trade, actually. Because one of the building blocks for trade in any global system is that countries align themselves or states align themselves so that the issue of sovereignty becomes less of a concern and those barriers are removed and then people work collectively to create that space where trade can happen. And so I think part of our efforts, even with the CET, of which there are many insertions and delineations and stuff that are not part of the agreement, even there, I'm speaking of CARICOM, we still don't have that domestication of the space that is necessary for trade to happen. So you're trying to create domestic trade along international borders. And I think we need to wake up and see that that can't work. If it could work, then in the 1950s, 58, I think, when the British attempted the Federation, it would have still existed. That failed because people did not want to give up that which they have, which is the individuality, sovereignty. And so as we try, Ian, to build an entity that allows us to have scale, common interests, and a direction that can allow for movement to happen, it's inhibited by walls that we have. And I mean, we can sit here and try to say why trade is not happening and ignore the fact that we can speak in rooms and go home in individual silos and still nothing happens. And we expect CSME to happen. So I heard Indonesia, I've been there, I've seen short sea shipping at work in ways that baffles me. Why can't we do this? Because we're not one government. We're not one person saying this will happen. And so as a region, we are forced to try to be nice to each other, but we don't want to give up that which would make us one people. And we can sit in forums, and I've been to many, where we speak around it. The truth is, every island trades for what it feels is in its best interest. And that is an inhibition to trade. You have individual port authorities in small islands next to each other with completely different tariffs, different setups, customs that are part of a common customs union that does 25 different things in every island. You wonder if you're in the same space. And yet we're speaking about trade and commonality. It's not working, and it's not working not because the modalities don't exist. You can't have painted cloth with different symbols and colors and have a unified trade environment that works. We have to fix that. And I am getting older and will probably leave the region where my children will come back and still be on the stage saying, why is trade not happening? Because we have forced our people to be individualistic about their individual islands, and that is keeping us close but very, very, very far. So if you only cross the line between Bequia and Union Island or Suriname and Guyana, you get arrested because you're fishing in the wrong side of the sea. Those are realities that I think are so odd that we have to break away. I
Yes,
just
sir.
thought I needed to.
No, it's Darwin. Yeah.
And if I may add that with that trade that we want and we must have, because every island wants that export trade, we have to figure out what we can do to make that work. So every port cannot be a huge transshipment port. Every port cannot have 4 vessels coming to that port, because I think in the study it was mentioned that they don't have enough vessels coming, and that's the reason why they don't have trade. No, because a vessel is not going to come for 5 boxes, just not going to come. You know, and now with the environmental issues, which make it more complex, we're going to have to figure out the solution on how to deal with that. And I think I sat down with somebody today and we were talking about short haul and long haul. Short haul is difficult. It is very difficult. And so I don't want to be negative, but I just want to put it out there that there cannot be a transshipment hub everywhere. And I have to be careful because Jamaica has a huge transshipment hub. So I don't want it to seem that I am, I'm being selfish. But just the other thing, the size of the island and the size of the islands and the fact that the cruise ship business is critical to most of the islands, if not all. And the way that it works is that you can only do cargo operations in the night because there's crews in the day. So that also affects the cost, because the cargo ship has left one port and has to sit and wait outside till the cruise business is finished. And as Darwin said, we're all connected, you know. So another question is that you can't rely on when you can get the export. Well, if there is a problem in one port, it's going to affect the other ports. And I'm not going to use names because I don't want anybody to be offended. Because if you are delayed because your cranes have broken down or there is a challenge in your port, it's going to affect the next 3 ports. And then the big thing, which Darwin mentioned, is that we have to change the way that labor is structured. It has to be that every 7 days, 7 days out of every week is equal. It can't be that if you work on a Saturday, there's a different rate. If you work on a Sunday, it's a different rate. It has if we're going to compete, if we want our products to get out into the world trade at a competitive price, we have to look at our internal cost.
Thanks. Darwin, I'm going to come back at you in a little bit, but I want to ask Wilson and Fatima to weigh in on this issue of labor and the fact that, for the most part, the region is not a 24/7 region. What have you seen with respect to these types of practices, industrial relations practices in other parts of the world? And by the way, Wilson, you're going to have to help me out with this hornet's nest because you started it, so I'm going to come.
Yeah. It's my role to cause these issues. What have I seen? Well, it's been a bit of a mix. I really have to defer to some of the port authorities here or the operators. I think what you're talking about in terms of the labor environment might be things like resistance to change in terms of technology and things like that. Is that part of the challenge? And
I think it's even a bigger problem than that.
Perhaps I'm being too delicate. Yeah. I think what I've seen, you know, and it extends a little bit in terms of the role of the public and the private sector and where environments encourage or have a strong labor environment. Most of the port environments that I'm aware of, until you get, say, into the Dubai Port Authority kind of world, do have the stevedores unions and those sorts of environments, which are a significant contributor in terms of how you design your port operations. So I tend not to have as much to contribute, I think, in terms of any unique insight. I think there versus when we're dealing with companies who are looking to investing, they're having to accept that labor environment. So it's really just a stable labor environment that they're looking for. I know I'm skipping over a number of other issues that my colleagues on the panel have raised here, but I'd probably stop there and turn it to Fatima to see. You may have seen other things, but. Yeah.
Maybe to add on I think the labor consideration are always very complex. My initial thinking it is that what we see in many, especially in small ports in the Caribbean, there is often authorities that play a role both at the level of regulation and operation of the port. So this is coming together in the same authority. And trying to bring as much as possible the private sector in the operational part. This is easy to say, but I think it's extremely difficult to implement. And one of the main reasons is actually on the labor side. So I think that. There are also, the practice, and this is very clearly spelled out in the report on the common practices of, for example, certain ports operating or quite a lot of ports operating only over the week, so the weekends they are fully closed, and that creates really, a lot of operational problems for the shipping. So I think there is quite a lot of complex labor issues. There also, as the ports are very well known for the unions that are very strong, very vocal, and that complicates very much the discussion. So definitely, I think the labor dimension is complex, but it's, I think, an issue that also, I think, politically should be taken seriously, I think, if, on the way forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Darwin, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I won't skirt over that issue at all. I think we have done poorly at our ports, and I'm a port director. The union environment, the ancient structures that we have at our ports, the unwillingness of our governments to actually lead the path of reform, the need to burden the port with excessive people. These are things that we can't no longer do. And here's why. In this report, which was just done, there's a missing piece, the most critical piece, and the most critical challenge facing the Caribbean. It is because our ports are so inefficient. And the efficiencies are captured by outdated infrastructure, because St. Lucia and Grenada are breakbulk ports. These ports were built in the 1960s. They were not built to handle containers, but they are handling containers. Then they have the same group of people, the gang of people, the number of people that existed when we had lighters offloading cargo into the warehouse. That hasn't changed yet, 2024. That's still there. So the burdensome environment persists. And that cost is passed on to the lines, who passes it on to the marketplace. So when we speak of cost, don't just look at the bill of lading. We are contributing to our own demise as well. I might get fired from this position of speaking, but I want to speak the truth to this, because it's more important to do it than to sugarcoat it. So here comes CII. And what the ships are saying is, if the IMO is saying to us, we must slow down, it means that we can't deal with the inefficiencies that existed prior to this decision. None of the lines can get away from it, because unlike many other global decisions where the Caribbean just existed in our own little on the beach kind of environment, they are pushing this decision right at us. And the ships have to comply. So a ship that was going at 18 knots can now only travel at 11 or 12 knots. So if you were taking that 18 knots to go to all your markets, now you are not able to get to the markets that you want. So ships have begun to ask us, the Port Authority, questions. What can you do to improve your efficiencies? We need more equipment. We need better digitalization. They can't come to the berth and find a cruise ship there for the entire day anymore, but that's what they deal with. All right, so here is another challenge. So when you start looking at labor-related issues where, for some reason, the union decides that it's more important to shut the port down for 2 days because of a very simple matter, and now we believe that that doesn't matter, the ship cannot stop anymore. And so how do we move in that direction without taking steps, concrete steps, to address some of these vexing, very old, antiquated issues with labor contracts that needs to be torn up and changed? I must commend the Barbados Port for recently doing something very brilliant, which was to change the structure of how port costs was created, where the agents were double billing at the same time charging what the port was charging, and the government stopped it. We have one more port where that exists, and we're about to change that as well. That existed in our Caribbean. And so these changes are necessary, otherwise the impact of the CII is going to be very damaging. We have had one casualty, which is Haiti. 2, I won't speak of the other island because they've lost 4 ships. They only have 1. Folks, the Caribbean in 1992 had about 20 shipping lines serving us. Today we have Seaboard Marine, Tropical Shipping, CMA CGM, and King Ocean. And all of those lines, 4, Geese comes in every now and then. We have 4 lines left. Under CII, the lines are asking, can we survive? And if these efficiencies aren't elevated and removed, we may end up with 3. We may end up with 2. We'll be there, but we're getting less and less vessels coming because of these inefficiencies. We must address them. We are prepared to try to tackle them. We're going to Suriname next week with the 21 port managers. We're going to discuss what we can do there. But we need the governments to be serious and come on board and try to see what can be done to ease that burden of excessive irregularities, inefficiencies, and low productivities at our ports.
I have 2 things to clarify. Darwin said that there are 4 lines. There are 4 regional carriers. There are international carriers. So there's a CMA, there's a Maersk, there's a Zim. Those are deep sea. Those carriers come from Europe, they come from Asia. And those carriers come to Jamaica, Calcedo, Calan, and they bring the cargo, drop it there, and then there are regional feeders, express Caribbean feeder services that will bring the cargo down to the islands. So what Darwin is talking about are 4, which 20 years ago there were like 20 lines. But now, with economies of scale, they've realized that they cannot all operate in the Caribbean because our markets are small. So that's one. And the other thing that I want to change the conversation, that data is important. And if there was more data, the shipping lines would understand where there is business, and also if we would speak to each other. So, Darwin's organization that he's the head of, and the Caribbean Shipping Association, the communication is important so that we can all speak to each other to discuss what's taking place. And if we could step back and say, what is good for the region? How are we going to move the cargo between the islands? Because I think this is one of the conversations. One of the conversations is getting your cargo, the export to market. The other conversation is getting your raw materials into your islands. But one of the big conversations is moving intra-regionally. And that, I think, is something that the CDB can help us to deal with. You can bring the parties to the table to talk about, what we can all do to move the cargo between the islands. I think this is not my idea, in that, Darwin's view is that, Trinidad, and this is tricky because everybody wants to be the regional transshipment hub. And we all can't be that transshipment hub. And so Trinidad is popular with the lines because it has export. So when they bring the cargo to Trinidad, they have boxes coming out. Hundreds of boxes coming out. I mean, from Trinidad to Jamaica on a week, you can have 400 containers with tissue paper and all the other things, soft drinks and biscuits and, beds and all of that stuff. So the backhaul cargo is very important. So I'm throwing it out to the CDB that you need to bring the ports to the table. You need to bring the players to the table and say, how can we do this? Let's take off our individual hats and think, if we really want this to work, how can we make this happen?
I just brought the port to the table, didn't I?
I'm not the port.
Wilson, it looks like you want to weigh in on this.
No, it's interesting, the backhaul, to swing back to the Canadian side, that's been a real challenge for us in North America, because, and this is land transport in our case, right? But our logistics environment is really challenged by the fact that you have countless full trucks coming north and not many full trucks going south. Correct. So you do pay for it eventually. So there's a fascinating piece that I really liked in the study around the fact that the study was looking for ways to how do we make sure that those small interregional, the hub and spokes, how they were active, and getting more traffic. So I just wanted to weigh in on that. I did want to comment, and I couldn't quite tell, Darren, if I'd encouraged you or upset you here with my comment about Indonesia, but I wanted to add that the difference for me between, say, an Indonesia and the region and the ASEAN thing comes back to this digitization comment that you made, Coran. Within the ASEAN region, the multi-jurisdictions, what's really fascinating there is the effort that they're making to come up with a common digital trade platform, because they've recognized that amongst 20-some jurisdictions, they need to get some economies of scale in terms of how they interact. Huge investment, obviously, to standardize other behaviors, which then comes back into some of what I think you were talking about, Darren. But the piece on Indonesia, I think, that is interesting is, regardless of that it's just one jurisdiction, is that they've invested in a sort of a common infrastructure. So the physical experience of moving around, the government, recognizing that it was one, said it'll be a consistent experience. And so that's kind of an interesting role I would see for the individual governments within the region.
Wilson, I'm happy that you went there because I want to challenge Darwin. Now, Darwin, in spite of what you said, these countries have signed up to CSME. The intention is to create an economic space and presumably to be able to optimize on the production and trade potential of the countries. So I want to flip. I know that you're concerned that there's a lack of coordination, but instead I want you to bring a solution and tell us what an optimal configuration of investments and even institutional aspects of trade as well, what that looks like or should look like within the context of a CSME. And I know that Fatima's already touched on this as well. So I want you to flip it.
Ian is being so troublesome. First of all, I think that the effort with CSME, it must be lauded. It has to be something that we recognize has allowed a particular type of existence to be a part of our lives. The CARICOM experiment certainly is something we should not just maintain, but take further. And so my initial comment earlier was, let's domesticate the space. That might be easy to say and difficult to do, but we have to move in that direction. There's another thing that I would like to throw on the table, it might be controversial as well, is that there is very little that we actually move between St. Lucia and Grenada. Very little. There's not much happening there. You can't deny that and I saw 60%, in some cases 80%. Most of our goods come in from South Florida, a bit from Trinidad, yes, definitely, and some from Jamaica, but most of it comes from Miami. So the idea has to be if you try to understand the Miami model, you have to recreate it. Now, Miami doesn't make anything. Trinidad makes more things than Miami. But Miami is the basis for supplying all that we need. So why is Miami able to do that? Because logistics is very creative. It's an efficient way of delivering you something that you don't have. And it gets to you so easily that you just rely on it. And then you sit back and wonder, why am I doing this? It's easy. The ability to do it in our region is difficult because you don't have Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, or any other state competing with Florida. They realize that they can move their goods there on trains from as far away as Canada with the FEC and FX, all the way down to Miami. They consolidate there and they send it to us. We get goods from Honduras, Guatemala to Miami and they come to us. Folks, we get goods from Santo Domingo, a CARIFORUM country, going to Miami and coming back to us. That cargo could have come straight to us, but we don't want to give them access to CARICOM because we want to buy the goods after a distributor in Miami adds a markup, adds the freight, adds the taxes and duties. No, citizens are buying it. I don't know if that is a sensible thing to do, but I think you could radically transform the cost of existence if we thought about transforming that. So Ian, you asked for it. So I am actually telling you where I think we ought to be thinking. And so if we are excited to have Miami keep dominating us, why are we afraid of having one of our CARIFORUM nation add to the betterment of our existence? I find that to be a little odd. And like I said, maybe I don't live in an island that is petrified by how dominant Santo Domingo might be. I live in an island, Antigua. I wasn't born there, which is also a good thing. I'm not Antiguan. I'm representing Antigua. I am a Dominican. I'm not here representing Dominique, although that's where I was born. But I also believe that the Caribbean is absolutely important to me. And if we are not going to break up the walls that keeps us from doing what we do, then we're going to be sitting here with CSM, no matter what the institutional discussions we have, unless we break away from these individual walls, we're going to be talking nice words at CDB conferences and others, and we're going to be stuck with the same thing. So if you open the door, and by the way, at the last CARICOM meeting, Santo Domingo asked to be allowed in. I'm waiting to hear the answer to that. Because I am telling you, when you look at Pine Hill juices made in Barbados on the shelves in our stores in the Caribbean, and you look at Fruta made in Trinidad, and you look at a juice made in Santo Domingo, it is half the price. And that juice pays all the duties. So it's also true that the CET may not be as effective as creating a competitive environment that allows for us to exist. So even there lies a question mark. Would it be better not to have the CET on that Santo Domingo product? What would the price be? If cost of living is what we want to drive to, and cost of freight and cost of everything we want to bring down, Ian, I just gave you a very easy answer there. So maybe we can stop allowing me to create problems here. And
yeah, you're getting so passionate, you're spilling the water.
Sorry.
But Cora, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this. Interestingly enough, Cora, your compatriot, who delivered our WG Dimas lecture a couple of nights ago, sort of made these same points that Darwin is making. So, we are finding consensus, and maybe we need to make sure that we say this often enough so that people who need to hear will hear. Cora?
The transport in the important. And we must find ways in which to fix or solve or improve. Let's not say fix, improve how we connect with each other. And I agree that we cannot keep protecting. We have to allow free trade to exist. But for free trade to exist, there has to be data. We need to modernize our systems. So, as you were saying about having a common system within the whole community so that you don't have to be paying a different tariff when you go to a different island. And, you just know that it's going to be the same so everybody understands. And I think we need to agree to that. But we have a lot of national pride. And I said it today at lunch. The only thing that we are willing to collaborate with truly is cricket. We will, when we are playing cricket, we will rally around the West Indies. No problem with that. No. We all of us, we get goosebumps when we think about the cricket. But everybody else, all our politicians, we feel that we must have our own. My mother is 89 years old, and she had a huge fight with my father, who she had just met at Federation. and they didn't vote the same way. And to this day, she tells him that if he had voted for federation, it would have been different. I'm not sure, because we have become, we believe in our country. You know, we believe, as Darwin says, in our flag. You know, Jamaicans, would Jamaica want to run at the Olympics with Antigua as one Caribbean country? I don't think so. So we just have to figure out a way.
They're on the field in St. Lucia.
We just have to figure out a way about the transportation. And if we don't figure out a way about the transportation, we will never move forward, because we are islands and transportation connects us to the world. So that's my view.
All right. You guys have distracted me so much that I forgot that we had an audience, and I'm sure that they want to ask some questions. So let's just pause and allow anyone from the audience to ask any questions. No hornet's nest. I don't want to start. I don't want to start Darwin and Cora again. So.
Thank you very much, presenters. I am Samuel Berridge. I'm the High Commissioner for St. Kitts and Nevis to Canada, but I am a trade official in my former life. So I'm very intimate with the intricacies of the discussion, particularly the CSME. Now, the CSME is a work in progress, and we are trying to achieve a customs union. We are not a customs union yet. There are still 12 countries independent which form the union. So I understand the importance of fixing the administrative, the tariffs and all of those. Even the HS, the harmonized system, there are variations. What you might call this product in one country, you have a further breakout, and it's a different. So there are things that we need to fix. Also, the currencies, there are different currencies in the CSME. There's the East Caribbean dollar, which is run by six countries in the Eastern Caribbean. Then there is the Guyanese dollar, which is about $200 to one. The Suriname dollar, then the Jamaican dollar, the Belize dollar. So there needs to be currency conversion or even a protocol. And when you have a customs union, you pay for the item in one port and it has free circulation in all the other ports. We don't have that yet. So I think that in itself will help to fix the problem. But you can't have currency conversion. You can't have free circulation without a protocol on how you're going to share the revenue. So these are like rocket science to fix. The central bank governors often meet and they work out how we're gonna, the work has started, but it's still not complete. And unless you fix those problems, we're gonna be spinning top in mud, you know, and, but it's good for the discussion to continue. And one more point I have to make, there are some barriers, internal barriers to trade. Grenada has problems with trade in honey in Trinidad. Jamaica, your beef patties can go to Trinidad without them being confiscated. You know, so...
They solved that one.
They solved that one?
Yes, yes.
Well, I am yet to see, because you might have one customs official got the memo and another one the memo. So the unpredictability of these things, I believe in regionalism. I am a diehard regionalist. But until we sit down and work on the CET, which is not common, you know, we have to really, I like what Daryl is saying, but we have to continue the discussion. So I'm grateful that the CDB is providing the forum for us to discuss these, but let us continue to strengthen the CSME and move towards a customs union. Thank you.
Yeah, reactions?
I think that the customs union is necessary. I also believe that the our integration of our port infrastructures is also something that we have to look at, how we structure that, not just because of the different port authorities. Coran touched on something that, and I mentioned it earlier, Miami became what it is. Folks, if you are a little older than I am, you'd remember that Miami was not where we got our food from. Those of you who live in the islands came from Puerto Rico. There were small vessels going to Puerto Rico. That's who supplied us with food. Before Puerto Rico, we got supplied from the geese boat that came from the UK and Canada. All right, we got a lot of our supplies from Canada. As a matter of fact, our diet that we have has been influenced mostly by Canada. Pickled meat, the salt fish, the beans, lentils, and all that. That's them. As a matter of fact, to prove how important that was, the first time we had a ship as a region was because of the Federation. It wasn't because that they gave us a ship. They saw one space, and because you have one space, you can now have a ship. If you try to put a ship underwater now as a regional government, it has to go through 21 different flag states, 21 different port state inspection, because each flag has its own status of inspections. We haven't really thought about that yet, but I think we need to start grappling with that. You need to unite the actual ports themselves so you have a structure that works. And here's how I would simply put it. You have international cargo coming into Jamaica, you move it to Port of Spain in one ship to Port of Spain, and you distribute to the Caribbean from Port of Spain. You need one or two sub-regional hubs somewhere in the middle, and we solve the problem. We don't need to recreate what's there. We can take away the discussion of transport and ports by just agreeing to that simple fact. But because we are so polarized and everyone wants to be that one, no matter what the industry says, and Coran, we do have data. Trinidad has the most cargo exported to the Caribbean by no other island. Trinidad has all of the components that Miami has: warehousing, freight forwarding, third-party logistics services, highways, roads, and they have 30 ports. That island is a giant sleeping that we're not engaging properly, that we ought to wake up quickly and see. It too, Trinidad that is, has to do some things to make some adjustments as well. But it is sitting there as the bastion of future development and trade for the region. We need to engage it. Every week, every island gets a ship from Trinidad. Why we don't focus on that is a mystery to me, and we can start there. The customs part can come later, but if we just agree to do that, we solve a simple problem. The last time I did that, Coran, I said that the Jamaica Observer, they said I was persona non grata the next day. I was in Cayman Islands, but I wasn't speaking poorly of Jamaica at all. They're the best global connection in CARICOM, but they are not regionally connected. So it can't work to filter back down as well. So take the cargo to Trinidad and filter it through. From there, we can actually have some coordination in trade in our region.
Thanks. I want to pivot. Any other questions? I want to pivot slightly in the few minutes that we have. I think we have like 3 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about trends and where some of these trends could possibly take us, not only in terms of technology, but also renewable energy, sustainable energy. How do you see these, I don't want to call them emerging because they're already here, but how do you see these trends affecting logistics? Can I start with you, Wilson, and then come to, so I'm going to come down the line very quickly because we're soon running out of time.
I'll be super quick then. It's interesting is there's typically people talk about 4 or 5 trends that affect the industry. Odd enough, at the risk of being controversial, I'm not sure that some of the environmental stuff is necessarily unique to the logistics industry. And again, when I think about particularly the challenges we've got here, that the 3 that I'd look at in terms of trends that I feel like have the most potential to affect positively and negatively. Digitization again, to go back to that theme, the ability to leverage that. I think fuel costs, we've all talked about fuel costs, the use of the inter-regional versus, the hub and spoke, I guess is what I'll call it in terms of that network. Fuel costs will continue to dictate how people go back and forth. And then, the link there is the last mile solutions. How you go from break of bulk to last mile. So I'd probably touch on those three if I only had 30 seconds.
Fatima?
Yeah, no, so I think that for me, definitely, I mean, digitalization is something we are seeing more and more. And I mean, again, I will bring again Jamaica an example, but I think in the case of, for example, digitalization of port, this is really a fantastic example, actually, that we don't need to go outside of the region to see this happening already. And Antigua is another one. And I think here in digitalization, all the trends, the Internet of Things, the artificial intelligence, all this is going to be extremely impactful in the port management and overall logistics. Another, for me, the environmental angle, it's also something that we are seeing globally. And for example, the European Union has been quite aggressive in the regulations that have been put in place to change both, sustainability on the fuels used by shipping, for example, and also the sustainability at the level of the ports. And I think that is something that I would say in the European Union, it is something that it is maybe it's quite evolved, but it's something that we are seeing also globally. And the third point is also linked to the fact of the e-commerce, that we are seeing globally. This is a global phenomenon that is also linked to the last mile. Also, I mean, I think we are seeing a change in the way goods are delivered. People don't go anymore to buy to a store, but then they want to be delivered at their own house. So I think all this has a big impact on logistics.
30 seconds?
30 seconds. Jamaica has a port community system, which has been a game changer for our logistics. It really has. And I encourage the whole region to look at us, visit, to see it. Because this port community system, you put the information in the portal, and all of the players, the truckers, the custom brokers, the agencies, the terminals can all then get that information. And your data is secure because you have your own codes to get the information that you need. And it's good. I mean, we spent a lot of time. I am the president of the Shipping Association of Jamaica, and that was one of our gifts to Jamaica. We went out and we looked at port community systems, and we did all the pilot projects, paid for the personnel till we brought it to a stage, and then it was taken over by the Port Authority of Jamaica. So I would encourage a port community system for everyone.
Yeah, we want to thank CDB for funding the regionalization of our maritime single window. The International Maritime Organization has mandated that no longer will they allow customs to board the ship as of 2025, I think. Yes. And so we need to be paperless in that respect. And the IMO has built a model in Antigua, which we now have residing in London. It's free. We are also ready to help any port that wants to implement it for free. And we got help with CDB to do that. And I think that is one thing that we can record as a huge win for the region. Please don't go recreate it. It's there for free. We tend to like to do that. Finally, I think and wish that we would move the last mile logistics of less than container load cargo from the ports. Take the warehouses away. Let what's happening in Trinidad and Barbados and Jamaica and every other port port in the world become a reality at our ports. If we took those warehouses away, we would remove 50% of the port cost from the port and switch something that we've been doing for free for NVOs to them. We've been doing that for 50 plus years. It's time that the NVOCCs pay for that service. It's a free service that governments are doing at our ports now, maintaining a legacy that we need to move away from. I'm hoping that that can start a discussion, because we are getting ready to remove the port from under, the warehouse from under the port, and privatize it. That would make a big difference.
Do you know what an NVOCC is? Okay, so a vessel operator is a vessel operator. An NVOCC is a non-vessel operator, but they sell cargo. So they come to the shipping line, they rent a container, they have their warehouse, and they go from place to place, pick it up, and then pack a container and bring it back to the shipping line and deliver it to the shipping line. Then it goes on the vessel and it goes to Darwin's port, and then Darwin, then he strips it, and by stripping, he takes out all of the cargo and he delivers it to each individual shipper. So if you are living in New York and you want to send a bed to Antigua for your mother, you go to an NVOCC and you put it in their container, and that's what it is. So everybody is a shipper, like an Amazon. Everybody is a shipper, but they're not a lot. So as opposed to shipping lines.
All right, thank you very, very much. When I met with this panel a week or two ago, I knew that we were going to have great difficulty sticking within the time that was being allotted, and as I expected. But I want to thank the technical team, comms, the audience, both here and online. And of course, I want to thank you, the panelists. This conversation will continue because ultimately it's about transforming lives. We want to make a difference in the lives of every citizen of this region. And that's a wrap.